Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the beautiful world you are. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. And of course, I am delighted to have with me John Perkins, who's the best-selling author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John, welcome. And I am so happy to have you with me today. How are you?
I'm great, Chantelle. It's good to be with you. Thank you. It's the miracle of modern technology that we can be halfway across the world from each other and chatting like this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I was saying to you, I mean, I actually thought you were in South Africa a number of years ago, but it turns out, as you say, you weren't. But there was a show that our investigative journalist did on Carte Blanche. They did a show on you a number of years ago and on your book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And I was absolutely blown away by this interview that I thought they did with you, but obviously it was just an expose, probably. And it was amazing for me to see what I think that had to be the first glimpse I had into what goes on behind the scenes. We always know there's a lot of shenanigans going on, and whoever it is pulling the strings, it's never the guys in the forefront. They're generally just the puppets. That there's something quite big and sinister happening in the background. So that for me was really my first peek into seeing what really goes on. So, I mean, when you got onto the show, I was like, John Perkins, I can't actually believe I'm sitting talking to you. Who in a million years would have thunk that I'd be having you on my show how many years later? But it's such a pleasure to have you. So maybe you could just give us a little bit of an intro on yourself, how you got into being an economic hitman, and maybe you can tell us what that is in your words. What is an economic hitman?
Well, I guess the simplest way to describe it is officially my title, incidentally, was chief economist at a major international consulting firm. And I had a pretty good sized staff, anywhere from 30 to 50 people at different times working for me. My job was really to identify countries that have resources that our corporations want, like oil or other resources, and then arrange a huge loan to that country, or loans from the World Bank or its sister organizations, what's known as the Washington Consensus. But the money would never actually go to the country. The country would never see the money. It would be transferred from the banks to a U.S. corporation, like a Halliburton or a Bechtel or a Stone & Webster, Brown & Root, usually big engineering companies, to build major infrastructure projects in the country. Things like electric power systems, highways, ports, industrial parks. And these were things that would benefit a few of the wealthy families in the country, the families and the cronies that owned, that owned big industry, that benefited from this infrastructure. But the majority of people would end up suffering because money would be diverted from social services like education and healthcare and others to pay the interest on the loans. And of course, the corporations would make a lot of money. The ones that actually built the projects, they'd make a lot of money. The rich people would make a lot of money in the country, and everybody else would suffer. But it looked good on paper, and I believed the paper for many years. I thought I was doing a good thing because I learned in business school that if you want to help a poor country, you invest a lot of money in infrastructure and you see the economy grow. Because we measure the economy by GDP, and it does. That happens when you invest in these big infrastructure projects. What I didn't realize until much later, after I'd been in the job for a number of years, was that GDP really only measures how well the wealthy are doing and the big international corporations. It doesn't measure prosperity of the country. It measures how rich the rich are getting. you know, so at some point the country wouldn't be able to pay its debt. It's paid the interest by drawing money off education and healthcare and other social services, but it can't pay the principal. So we go back in the guise of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and we say, hey, look, since you can't pay your debt, we'll help you restructure, but that means you got to sell your oil or whatever the resource is. Today it tends to be lithium and cobalt and copper, the resources that are necessary for high tech. We'll help you restructure your debt, but sell these resources real cheap to our corporations without many or any environmental or social regulations, or vote with us on the next United Nations vote, or let us build a military base on your soil, or privatize your public sector businesses, your water systems and your utilities, and sell them to our investors, things like that. So really, Chantelle, what we were doing was creating a global empire. And we can call it an American empire, but it's really a big corporate empire, an international corporate empire that's highly supported and driven by US policies. But in fact, to a large degree, the US doesn't benefit a lot from it because many of these corporations never pay taxes, for example.
Wow. Right.
And I must mention that in the case where a president of a country or the minister of finance or whoever we were dealing with didn't accept the case, that's when people we call the jackals go in. And these are people that either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. And of course, the United States has a long history of sending in the jackals. You've seen it throughout Africa. You've seen it in South Africa. You know, but the classic cases that most everybody knows about are Allende in Chile and most of the Decca in Iran, and most recently, 2009, Zelaya of Honduras. So you know, it's my job was pretty easy. I could tell the president or one of his underlings, hey, look, I'm going to help make you guys and your families rich, or you can meet the similar end to some of these other people who they've all heard about who went down because they didn't buy into the deals. So most of them buy into the deals pretty quickly.
So basically what they're saying there, well, what the EHM, as you call the Economic Hitman, the EHM would do then is go say, okay, here's the deal. We're going to make it very cool for you guys. We're going to line your pockets with lots and lots of dollars. You as the authorities or certain, like if it's the royal family or whatever that might be, will be very well taken care of. But basically the country is not going to benefit at all. The people of the country will not benefit. And if you don't buy into it, then basically you're going to get taken out. Is that it in a nutshell?
Well, except we would never say the people aren't going to benefit. We would be part of selling a story that the people will benefit. So the president or whoever can take these reports that we do to the local press and show them, look, when we accept this loan and hire these companies to build the infrastructure, our economy is going to soar. And the implication is that most everybody believes is when GDP increases, everybody's better off. So there's a whole perception there of benefit to everyone. So it's a story we sell ourselves. I believed it for a long time because that's what business school teaches me, and that's what the World Bank says. But we also provide reports that the government leaders can sell to their people. And it looks very good on paper. So it helps them get reelected because they get this huge loan and now they're going to improve the highway system or the electric utility system or whatever that makes people happy and proud that this is going to happen. And sometimes it does benefit some of the people somewhat. They may get a little electricity, but the real benefits are going to the owners of big industry and the commercial sectors.
Wow.
But yeah, we basically would go into we mentioned this off air earlier, but I like to say we'd go into an office of a president or a minister of finance and we say, hey, here in this hand, I've got a few $1 million. Not today, it would be a few $1 billion, for you to help you become richer. Or in this hand, if you don't agree, I've got a gun. And I never actually carried a gun, but I knew these people we called the jackals were right behind me. And these government officials would know that too. They were not naive.
Yeah, because I know there were a couple of one that reached their untimely end through air crashes and stuff like that. So it's always made to look like an accident, isn't it? It's not really it's seldom a blatant assassination, right? It would be made to look like an accident.
It's true to the world press. It's presented as an accident, but leaders know. So, I only had two presidents that did not play my game, and they were democratically elected president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and Omar Torrijos, the head of state of Panama. And I knew them both personally and dealt with them, and they were extremely courageous, and they refused these deals completely and openly, and defied them. And Torrijos particularly was quite well known all over the world. South Africa had a lot of great things to say about him, because he, this head of state of this little country, Panama, with a small population and small economy, stood up to the big giant of the north, the United States. And both of these two presidents, Roldos and Torrijos, less than 3 months apart from each other, had these very suspicious airplane crashes. And of course, nothing was ever proven, because when a plane crashes, if there's a smoking gun, it goes down with the plane. It's
right, exactly.
You can't find it. And but so to the world, these were both presented as accidents, but they were the synchronicity between the two was amazing, and leaders around the world got the message. They knew that these were not accidents, or at least they assumed that these were not accidents.
Yeah, everyone was talking about absolutely the three-letter agencies. I mean, I look at that, and I remember not long after Nelson Mandela was released from prison, yeah, and I think most of us realize now he was certainly not the saint he was portrayed to be. What was his name? Oh, the Mozambican guy. Samora Machel was the president of Mozambique, and he also met his untimely death in a plane crash.
Mm-hmm.
And not long after, Nelson Mandela and his wife were married. And I mean, you just got to look at these things, and you got to question what the heck is that really about, right? Because I think none of these things are coincidental, and they love certain ways of eliminating their targets. There's always a certain way. I mean, I think we've seen that a few times over.
Yeah, and presidents and their staffs and cabinet members are put in a very difficult position, frankly, because I've talked to presidents who will say, well, I had a choice of staying as head of state and trying to do the right thing on some levels, but also giving in to these demands by what I would call the corporatocracy, the empire.
Corporatocracy. I love that word you created, by the way. It's corporatocracy. Yeah. Guys, you all got to remember the word corporatocracy. I mean, that is like so self-explanatory, that's for sure.
Yeah, because that's really what this empire is. It's not really an American empire, although, as I said, the head of American politicians are part of the corporatocracy. And so there's a real strong relationship, but it's bigger than that. And today it goes to China big time. But so I don't know where I was going with all that, but these heads of state, they understand that it's to their benefit to do this, to stay in there, and then maybe do whatever they can. Maybe they can increase minimum wage a little bit. Even the ones that really want to help their people, they understand that if they get assassinated or overthrown in a coup, they're going to be replaced by someone who only caters to the corporatocracy. So,
right.
If you really happen to be one of the few leaders who is a really good guy, and wants to help the people, as Torrijos was and as Roldos were, you don't do what Torrijos and Roldos did, which is really stand up to the corporatocracy and defy the corporatocracy. You play the game, and you do what you can within that system to do what's better. It's a huge compromise. And I'm not saying that's the right action to take. I'm just saying that that's the facts of the world. And I've known presidents who did go that route and said, well, you know, I got to do whatever I can to stay in power and do the best I can. And incidentally, I find the same thing with corporate executives of big corporations, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 corporations. They'll say, you know, I want to do the right thing. I want to help my employees. I want to give them raises. I want to increase the minimum wage. I want to clean up the environment. I've got grandchildren. I want to create a better world. But I know that if I lose a little bit of market share or the stock price goes down, my main investors, the big time investors, will throw me out. And they'll replace me with someone who only cares about stock prices or market share. So my job is to stay in power and do as much as I can on a small level to make this company more socially or environmentally or both responsible. So there's this incredible game that these heads of state play. And you know, Chantelle, we can all understand this because to a certain degree, we all do this. You know, right. We all, we all fly in airplanes and drive cars, and a lot of people eat meat, you know, and we all know that these things are bad for the environment. And yet
that's more just a microcosm of we kind of escalate the microcosm of that macrocosm. So we can't, you know, it's exactly that. We can't just say this happens at government and state level. You look in the business environment, right? In corporate companies, in family units. You know, it's all happening there. There's a authoritarian who basically shouts the odds, and if you're not in line with that, you're going to get your ass whipped. It's as simple as that. This is just really on a macro. Absolutely, I fully agree with you there. I fully agree with you on that. Yeah, it really just is it's like this great big machine that somehow we've all chosen to be on this earth at this time. I always say this is such an exciting, beautiful time to be alive. And I think it's such an amazing way that we can get out of this matrix, because we really are in the matrix. And I've watched a bit of your stuff as well. And I really like what you're saying, you know, about how we can do things, but I want to get to that a little bit later. But if you don't mind, I want to reverse a little bit. And I want, if you wouldn't mind explaining to the viewers and myself how you kind of got into this system. It's very interesting what I found when I was reading and listening to your book. There's certain, and I want to just make it clear to our viewers. I did ask John beforehand if he was involved in the secret societies and brotherhood of the Freemasons. That's a resounding no. So, and I know that with a lot of that stuff, there are certain things that have to be done and oaths to be taken and stuff like that. But no, that is not the situation here. But by the same token, the powers that be have a way of pinpointing who the people are that can carry out these missions or these jobs. How can you, if you can just reverse a little bit, if you don't mind, and then explain to us how they got to you, that they kind of like, because you were super successful. You were super successful in what you did. I mean, you know, there's no question around that. You were dealing with the head honchos of the world. So in order for you to have done that, there would have been a certain path for you to follow. Can you maybe just explain that to us, please? Yeah,
it's actually, I think it's probably a much more normal kind of path. Oops, sorry. That was my phone. Sorry. I thought I turned it off. I thought I turned it off, but I guess I didn't. Now it's off.
It's funny because as your phone came through, a message came through. I thought that was
Oh,
Message
oh,
came
my,
on.
oh my gosh! Excuse me. I think it's the National Security Agency calling. Well, I don't care what you say. I'm going to talk on the show anyway. Okay, so just screw off, bug off. There we go.
I love it. Thank you.
I wanted to do that for a long time, you know.
You had to do it on a show to Africa, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, I've done it in the book, I think, anyway. But you know, there was a very strong attempt on my life too. That's another whole story.
So cool.
But in answer to your question, it's all about the Vietnam War. So, you know, by the time I turned 18, I was draft fodder. The Vietnam War was raging, and the draft was coming after me. And I hated the war. I was not about to go off to Vietnam and kill or be killed by people I had nothing against. I agreed with Muhammad Ali, the boxer Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, who said, I ain't going off there to fight those people. I ain't got nothing against them. I ain't going to be killed by them, or I'm not going to kill them either. I felt that way. And so, I went to college, but actually the draft didn't come after me till my sophomore year in college. I was fed up with college. I wanted to go out in the world and experience the world. So I quit college and went to work for Hearst newspaper, this big newspaper chain in the United States. I love that job. I was in the city room. It was crazy. It was wild, like something I'd never experienced. I grew up in a little rural town in New Hampshire where my dad was a school teacher. I'd never experienced anything like this. But then the draft came after me. So I got back into school, and I ended up going to business school, and that's kept me out of the draft until I got that. When that finished, I'm still facing the draft, and I don't want to leave the country and all my family by going to Canada or South Africa or someplace, and I don't want to go to prison. So I joined the Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps was draft deferrable, but before I did that, I got married my senior year in college, and my wife's father was very high up in the U.S. Department of the Navy. One of his best friends was very, very high up in the National Security Agency, the NSA. And he understood my problem, and he said, well, you could maybe join the NSA, and that would be draft deferrable. So I said, well, that's a great idea. I can become a spy, James Bond. At that point in my life, I thought that would be exciting and fun and interesting. That's not going to Vietnam, but it's So he arranges for me to have an interview, several days, very intensive with the NSA. And they included lie detector tests. And in that process, I think they discovered three things that were very crucial about me. It made me vulnerable to them. And these three were that I really wanted to have money, because I never had any. A teacher's son, in rural New Hampshire. And I wanted power, and I wanted women. And so my dad was teaching at a boys' boarding school in New Hampshire. I grew up living in a boarding school house and eating in the dining room every day from the time I was 4 years old. I was surrounded by boys all my life, and I went to that school. When I was in high school, with no girls. I didn't know. I was terrified of girls. I was incredibly attracted to them, but terrified of them because I didn't know anything about them. And so I'm in this, and I got married. And I was in college, so there's been one woman in my life who was very much like my mother in many respects. So that was easy for me. But so I go through these tests, and they come to the conclusion that they've got leverage against me. They can offer me money, power, and sex. And that was the conclusion. But I didn't know that at the time. And after I got out of those interviews, I was offered a job with the National Security Agency as a trainee. And I was still in college. I had about 3 months left, and I walked by this conference room one day, and there was a Peace Corps volunteer giving a talk, and I just happened to walk in there. And my God, that appealed to me. He was talking about, going and living in countries and living with the people. And I had a fascination with the way that Indians in the United States had lived close to the land in the forest. I'd grown up, in rural New Hampshire, surrounded by forest. The Algonquins speaking people used to be there. My family went back over 300 years. We had some Indian blood, I think. We weren't ever quite sure, but it looked that way. And so I went up to this guy after his talk, and I said, hey, if I requested the Amazon, where I knew people still live that way, do you think I would get it? And he looked at me like I'm crazy, and he said, I'm sure you'd get it because nobody wants to go there, and we need Peace Corps volunteers there. So to make a long story short, I ended up being in the Peace Corps for 3 years, and in the Amazon for much of that time. But while I was there at the end of my term, at the end, after about 2 years before I started my third year, which was an extension, I was approached by this man in a business suit and looking very official. And it turned out he was the senior vice president at the company where I became ultimately chief economist. And he was also a liaison between that company. He was a colonel in the Army Reserve, U.S. Army Reserve. He was a liaison with the National Security Agency and the CIA. And he had my files. And he eventually offered me a job and recognized that I had certain skills. They had leverage against me, but I was a good writer. They needed an economist who could really write reports without a lot of information, because the countries I was going to go to didn't have a lot of data, and someone who could survive under rough conditions. And I had all those assets. So, and when I got out of the Peace Corps after 3 years, now I'm 26 years old, and the draft can't come after me any longer because that's the cutoff age. And so they offered me a job, and I take it.
Wow. So that's when they started training you, and you obviously started doing your, because I think you ended up as the chief economist. Was that right?
Yes. Well, the training was, so the next thing I know, I'm hired as an economist, and the only economist the firm had at that time, and they needed the World Bank had now mandated that engineering companies like that one had to have economists writing the economic reports, but previously had been done by engineers. The World Bank said, you can have economists. So it was me. And the three other guys had the job, but none of them could do it well. They all had advanced degrees in economics, but they couldn't survive in the wilds of Ecuador or Indonesia or wherever and write these reports. Anyway, it's a long story. It's in the book. But the next thing I know, I'm approached by this very attractive woman. Again, they know my weakness, and she introduces herself as Claudine Martin or Martin, and she says she's going to be my trainer. And we ended up going to her little apartment on Beacon Street in Boston. The headquarters were in the Prudential Tower in Boston, which is right next to Beacon Street. And I would spend days in her apartment, and she would tell me what it was I was expected to do. And at the same time, she was, making sure that I got all the other, she told me you get power and money, and she was making sure I got the third thing, sex, and teaching me also how to relate to women, how to seduce women, and how to properly be seduced.
Wow.
It was a really fun training program, I got to say, but it also was very. But it also,
yeah, well, I think nowadays they call the honeypots, aren't they?
Oh, she knew all the tricks, but it was also very serious about, she told me about what I would be expected to do about arranging these large loans, and also, like I learned how to legally bribe heads of state. We didn't get into this before, but my company was determined not to break any of the U.S. laws against corruption, against bribery. There were some very strict laws, but there's so many ways around that. And I'll give you one example. This company was located in Boston. our board of directors and a lot of our executives had very close ties to MIT, Harvard, Boston University, Boston College, Northeastern. There's all the, Boston's full of colleges. And so I could go to countries that I wanted to have the president on our side and offer him and all of his cronies scholarships for their kids. I would say, we can get your kids into one of the great Boston colleges, and we'll completely pay for it. We'll give you your kids a full scholarship. We'll pay for airfare. We'll pay for room and board. We'll hire your children when during Christmas vacation or summer vacation, or when they graduate. And that's worth a heck of a lot of money, especially to someone in a country like Bolivia or Guatemala or Colombia or Ecuador. It's worth a lot of money to anybody. But it's completely legal. In fact, we brag about it. So, we released these reports to the Boston Globe and other local newspapers about how last year the company, gave $2 million in scholarships to people in very poor countries. We never happened to mention that it was to people who didn't actually really need the scholarships. They were the wealthy families, but it was really a bribe, but totally legal. And there are a lot of other there are other things you can do around those same lines, big time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So obviously I would imagine they deliberately created these loopholes, because to me, obviously they would have seen where these loopholes were coming from and how they were being used, right? It was just not a direct bribe where you could be arrested or put in jail for it or something like that, right?
Well, yeah, and I don't know that anybody has to create the loopholes, because I think under almost any law, there's, smart lawyers or smart economists or smart whatever you happen to be, smart economic hitmen can find ways around the law if somebody wants to find their way around the law. Now I write a lot about how we need to transform this system that I call the death economy a degenerative death economy to a regenerative life economy. And I'm very clear that I think, laws that try to stop you from doing things don't usually work too well. The things that work well are the ones that give you incentives to do the right thing, not to punish you for doing the wrong thing, but to give you incentives to do the right thing. Yes. And that's, then it makes it, then there's not the motive to bend the law. Whereas where we were told, don't pay off bribes, don't slip money under the table to anybody, and yet our competitors from other countries, and some from the United States who didn't care so much, they were paying people off. Overt corruption, overt bribery. We were smart enough to figure a way to do it that wasn't illegal. There's nothing illegal about giving scholarships to people from other countries.
Wow. One of the things that I was absolutely fascinated by was the involvement that the US had in Saudi Arabia in pretty much, let's call it westernizing. Westernizing, is that a right word?
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
I was like, what? Maybe you could explain to us how that happened. What happened in Saudi Arabia. One thing I was completely fascinated by as well, you talk about when you first got there, there was herds of goats eating the rubbish in the streets, and your driver said no self-respecting Saudi would be seen picking up garbage. So they have the goats to do that. And that was kind of like one of your inroads there. I'd love to hear you maybe just tell that story about how the US got Saudi Arabia to do what they did and pretty much compromise, if you will, the royal family there, so that they did get involved.
Yeah, well, and my company was the first of many American companies that ended up going in. So we were right at the beginning edge. So what happened was back in the early 70s, between the war between Israel and the Arab world had really heated up, in the United States had sided with Israel, and Saudi Arabia was really the lead in OPEC, the Organization for Petroleum Producing Countries, and Saudi Arabia was the lead one, and also had more oil than anybody else. And they instituted sanctions against the United States, an embargo. So oil wasn't coming into the United States, and we had at our gas stations, for example, long lines. People sometimes waited a day or more to get gas, and it just wasn't there, and it was destroying our economy. And the U.S. Treasury Department, somebody very high up in the U.S. Treasury Department and the U.S. State Department came to my company and said, we need to put an end to this. We need to make sure it'll never happen again. We need to get Saudi Arabia on our side. So you do it. And they called me in because the talents that I had, and we ended up getting a very large contract with the U.S. Treasury Department. So they paid the bills, they paid us. We didn't officially work. I didn't officially work for the government. I was working for a private company, but the private company had this huge contract with the U.S. Treasury Department. And we went off to Saudi Arabia to basically seal this deal. And it was called, we referred to it as SAMI, the Saudi Arabia money laundering agreement. I think that's how it, it's been a long time since I've talked about this, Chantelle. But, and basically the agreement became, it's a long story, but the short version of the result is that Saudi Arabia agreed to basically reinvest all its petrodollars, or the money it made off selling oil to the world, in U.S. Treasury bonds. And the interest from those bonds would be used to hire U.S. corporations to westernize Saudi Arabia. Basically, we didn't say it like that, but that's what it amounted to build big cities in Saudi Arabia, which Bechtel Corporation took the lead on in that regard, and to build oil refineries and big factories and many other things, the things that have westernized Saudi Arabia, these incredible cities and so on and so forth. And in addition, Saudi Arabia agreed to never increase the price of oil by any number that wasn't acceptable to the major oil companies, and not ever to shut down the supply of oil again. And it agreed to only sell oil in dollars. That's what the petrodollar came in. So the United States in 1971 went off the gold standard under Nixon. And now the US dollar is kind of floating out there wildly, but now suddenly we've tied it to the price of oil. So it becomes the oil standard. And we in the United States, the quid pro quo was that we agreed to defend Saudi Arabia under any circumstances. And all those things happened. And, I went over to Saudi Arabia very quickly. I took a number of my staff members over. They lived there for quite a long time, implementing these policies. And, we can see, like with the Khashoggi case, where, this Saudi Arabian guy who was assassinated by the Saudi government, and it seems to be absolutely no doubt that's what happened. We defended the family. And it appears that after 9/11, we helped rush, the U.S. government helped rush family members out of the United States on airplanes when there were no flights allowed, and on and on and on. And we've stood by Saudi Arabia throughout. And, the first Gulf War was really a response to Saddam Hussein threatening to attack Kuwait and Israel. And Saudi Arabia. And our job was to go in and make sure that didn't happen. So it was quite a deal.
So you're basically confirming then that, I know there have been lots of rumors around this, that after 9/11, that bin Laden's family and friends, put it that way, family and friends were flown out of the States and protected. Well,
yeah, personally, I can't confirm it, but that seems, all the evidence certainly indicates that. I can't remember whether the U.S. government has actually admitted to it or not yet, but I think there's no question about it. But I will also say that the deal recently has been falling apart. And, this is this attempt now for Israel to negotiate some sort of an alliance with Saudi Arabia, as it's done with Egypt and some other countries, because Saudi Arabia increasingly has turned to China. And
Right.
several things in that regard have happened. One is that China has become so powerful and has, economically, and it very attractive. And the United States is no longer the world's sole empire. Saudi Arabia is emerging as the new empire, or at least it's competing very strongly with the United States, which is the topic of my third edition, or third in the trilogy of the Economic Hitman books that just came out about a year ago. But also, there's been tremendous resentment of the United States amongst Muslim countries because of the wars that we've conducted against Muslim countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, and the attitudes in the United States. Now, we in the United States, we like to say the Chinese are being very difficult and mistreating and discriminating against Muslims in China, which is true. But at the same time, they haven't conducted war against any Muslim countries. Both the United States and China and Russia have. So China is looked at by the Muslim world a little bit more favorably these days, and Saudi Arabia is wavering in its deal with us now. And of course, it's been since the early 70s that we've had that deal. So it's been a long, long time, but it was a very, very successful deal. And it's one of those I should be proud of having put together because it's been so successful. But I have to say, I'm not particularly proud of the success. At the time I was, because I thought it was the right thing to do. It's so interesting that throughout all of this time, throughout so much of the time I was an economic hitman, I kept thinking I was doing the right thing. And I think that's so true of many people in the business, that they don't know the problems they're creating.
I fully agree with that. I fully agree with that. I think a lot of people become part of the system. I mean, we can talk about who began the system and how it began, but really, they really are targeted, in my opinion. The majority of top players are targeted, and they're targeted from a young age, or maybe while they're at university and stuff like that. And then they are kind of guided and corrupted and manipulated into positions that, as you say, money is a very tempting thing. So, and of course, when you're working in this corporatocracy, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get out of that wheel.
Yeah.
So it absolutely is. But one thing, just while we're on the topic of Saudi Arabia, one of the things that also, when I was listening to your book and reading your book, it was about Idi Amin. Now, Idi Amin was president of Uganda in the 70s. And I mean, he was absolutely the most prolific dictator, I do believe, that Africa has ever seen. And Africa has had a few dictators. I mean, I think he even surpassed, what's the Zimbabwean one, Robert Mugabe. He literally exterminated his own people by the millions. He literally did. Mm-hmm. And what annoyed me so was that after he was pretty much overthrown, or whatever it was, he then, and I remember this in the 70s because I was a kid then, and I remember this at the time, but I don't remember the details. But then obviously he was then hidden in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis hid him. There he was, living his best life, fishing, taking strolls on the beach at sunset and at sunrise, swimming in the ocean, doing whatever he was doing. And this was done with the knowledge of the US government, and they kind of, because of the deals that were struck, obviously, between the US and the Saudis, and all because of oil. So let's not rock the boat too much. There this man was, after creating so much pain and so much anguish, living his best life to right till the end, and having abandoned his country and his people with absolutely nothing. They were left with absolutely nothing. I mean, anyone who knows about Idi Amin knows that name just evoked so much fear in the African people. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
He was living like a king in Saudi Arabia, quite literally. It's a great example.
Why do you think that was? I'm interested to know why they housed him and why they protected him the way that he did. What was the connection between Idi Amin and the Saudis? Do you have any idea?
No, I think it probably had more to do with, the whole colonial history of Africa and the involvement of the colonial powers from Europe as well as the United States, and the desire to continue to dominate resources in those parts of the world. And at that time, the colonial empires were beginning to collapse. We saw it in Zimbabwe. We saw it in Rhodesia, what became Zimbabwe, and throughout. And so I think it was all of those things were tied together, and we felt we owed something to Idi Amin.
Well, he probably sold out because we know Africa is probably one of the most minerally rich continents that there is, right? So, right. I mean, it's a well-known fact that I know the US as well has sent in their troops, whatever you call them, into so many different African countries, creating wars, right? Creating wars, and then going in there, being the peacekeepers and usurping their oil, gold, diamonds, whatever it is they're looking for, and that's how they would get it. I mean, as Africans, we know that happens. So it's just interesting because Idi Amin as well, I mean, whatever the resources in Uganda were at the time, he would have sold out. I mean, he was a big fat guy with nostrils this size. I mean, we always used to joke about him, about his nostrils being like sunglasses, right? I kid you not, okay? I kid you not. But, that was Idi Amin. But it was just so frustrating to know that that's actually, because I've often wondered about that. We knew he went somewhere. We knew he was hidden somewhere. Many people spoke about that being Saudi Arabia. But no one was really sure, actually. I mean, I know we haven't really spoken about it here for a long time. But I mean, and I wonder how many other sort of African leaders and things like that have been protected, of these dictators. It just makes makes us wonder how many, for me as an African, how many other people have been protected.
It's interesting, as you said, that it's the wealthiest continent in the world, resource-wise, and the poorest one per capita-wise, and Latin America is not too far behind in both of those regards. And, there's this colonialist mentality that's in both of those areas. And, I think leaders in both of those continents, it goes back a long time where they realized that to survive and to get wealthy, local leaders realized they had to collaborate with the colonial powers, and whether it was the British and the French and the Germans and the Dutch and so on in Africa, or the Spanish and the Portuguese in Latin America, if you cooperated with them, if you collaborated with them, if you worked with them, you got rich and powerful. If you didn't, you were gone. And then when the colonial powers left, these same families, these same groups of people understood that, well, we can just keep behaving the same way. We don't really need the colonial powers. We can just run these places ourselves. We're now the colonial leaders, basically. So today, I think both Latin America and Africa are, to a certain degree, and I think we could dispute the use of the word, but I think in essence, those areas are being colonized by local families.
Make no mistake. I mean, I'm a descendant of the colonizers, so I'm not, and I certainly have. I mean, if I look at my family lineage, rest assured they were powerful as well. So I'm not coming in here, and I don't want to say the Americans all bad or whoever was doing it. We all have a price to pay. And I think Latte, you said the Belgians, absolutely, the Belgians in the Congo, they were the worst when it came to, what's his name, Leipzig or whatever his name was. I mean, he was horrific were the Congolese. He was absolutely horrific. And to this day, I mean, we talk about blood diamonds, that's where they come from. And to this day, they are still going, the diamonds are still going to Belgium, and they are still being cut and set and done whatever in, what's the capital of Belgium again? I can't remember. Leopold.
I was just there, and I can't think of it either. I was just there a couple of months ago.
I feel like a bit of a dance here as well. But exactly, it's still happening. And I know for a fact what happens is, one of a guy I know that was part of the three-letter agency, but coming a Swedish guy living in Africa, was part of the corruption. I mean, like with the Bush Wars here. The Bush Wars basically ended at the 1989, 1990. And he said to me, Chantelle, he said, why do you think the Bush Wars ended? I said, because the terrorists surrendered. Oh no, he's gone. Anyway, Brussels, yeah. I'll carry on, and hopefully John will join us again. But I'll just carry on the story anyway. He said to me, Chantelle, why do you think the Bush Wars ended? So I said, because the terrorists surrendered, and he laughed. He said, well, when was the German wall broken down? I said, okay, here's John back again.
I don't know what happened, but something happened. And I think I hit a button by mistake over here. I was just trying to adjust my screen, and I think I hit a button by mistake, but I apologize. Here we are.
No problem. So I was just talking. It's unfair, by the way, in the capital. Yeah.
What is it?
Anyway, what I was saying was the guy, a friend of mine, who was saying to me, who was a Green Beret, by the way, and he trained with the Selous Scouts. They were trained by the Selous Scouts of Rhodesia, who were the top reconnaissance, and as well as the Kufute in Namibia, and the Rekis in South Africa. I mean, yeah, because really, our guys, South Africa had a very formidable army in its heyday. Nowadays it's a friggin' joke. I mean, these guys are riding around in tanks, crashing into each other. It's the local joke. But anyway, and he was saying to me, Chantelle, why do you think when did the Bush Wars end? I said, in 89, 90, somewhere around there. And he said, well, why do you think they ended? I said, because the terrorists surrendered. Starts laughing. He goes, okay, when was the wall in Germany broken down? I said, around about the same time. He says, nothing. He said, the same people that were backing the Bush Wars were then backing the wall being broken down as well. And they just didn't want to spend all the money. I went, oh my God. Mm-hmm. And it just made sense. I cannot tell you how destructive. Apartheid it was a disgusting system. I grew up in the heart of it. Okay, I was right there, growing up in apartheid. It was, and for me as a kid, it never ever sat well, ever. But we were also brainwashed into believing certain things, for sure. As white South Africans, we were brainwashed into believing certain things. So, but I remember when I was 16, 17, 18, when all our guys were going to the army and going onto the border, we called it. They were fighting on the border, right? I mean, day after day after day after day, these 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old guys getting killed on the border. For what? For what? Because of this fake war that was carrying on. I can't even begin to think about that. It just makes me sick. But anyway, this particular friend of mine, now I know, okay, what happens is the three-letter agencies would then send them in. Now, in Africa and in South Africa, you get different royal families, the royal tribes, okay? Now, they own the rights to the minerals and the resources in certain areas. So what the three-letter agencies would do was send in their guys, their agents, and they would then corrupt the royal families. And in so doing, they would then give them X amount of stuff, and then they would usurp. And a lot of it was emeralds, diamonds, and gold. that was the main resource that they were siphoning out of South Africa. And I mean, and I know the rest of Africa as well. There's not even a question, but I can really talk about South Africa with more confidence about that, because that for sure is what I know. So
Right.
these guys would come in and they actually had jobs to corrupt the royal families. And this particular friend of mine, I know, he was friends with the Mandelas. He was Nelson Mandela's personal security guard. He was at Mandela's funeral. He was hanging out there with the family, you know. So they really worked themselves up in these positions, but their job is to corrupt the royal family so that they can, as I said, you know, the different royal families, and they're not all big. I mean, you know, you'll get this bigger and smaller tribes, but they generally all have a royal head, or a lot of them have a royal head.
Right.
And then they are corrupted, and that's how they get the money out. And of course, the royal families would then have the, get the money and get the wealth, but the rest of the tribe does not. And that's unfortunately how this country suffers and this continent suffers, because unfortunately there's a lot of African heads of state who are very, very easily corrupted because of money. You know, they see, and of course the African people generally love America, because in America they see everyone has money, everyone is famous there. You know, you go to America, you become famous. You go to America, you get rich. You know, that's the kind of narrative that is sold.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite sad. But that is really, yeah, that's kind of like what's happened in terms of the Bush wars and stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, lots of the Green Berets and stuff would get trained by the Selous Scouts. Yeah, they'd come to South Africa and they were trained by the Selous Scouts. So they were also, you know, obviously do. I mean, and I know on another show, and hopefully I'm going to have you on again, if you agree, we can talk more about that then as well, in terms of, you know,
as I mentioned earlier, I had a good friend. He was actually a Reckies, and you know, he went through the training in Rhodesia first. He was trained in Rhodesia, which now is Zimbabwe. But then he ended up going to South Africa, and again, that's another whole story of how he took place in a number of CIA-sponsored coups, including the attempted coup with the Seychelles against Francois René, the socialist president of Seychelles. It was, anyway, another whole story. Yeah, this thing goes on and on and on. And now, you know, I think in another show, if we do another show together, it'd be interesting to talk about how China has gotten even better, if you want to call it that, or certainly more efficient. That's a better way to put it, I think, than we ever were. They've learned from the mistakes and the successes that people like I had, the mistakes I had and the successes I had, and other economic hitmen. I taught an MBA program in Shanghai, and I quickly realized what they want to do is pick my brain about how to be good at this job.
I saw that. I saw you lecturing in Shanghai to the MBA students on what a EHM is. That's very, very interesting, because it's true. The Chinese are super, super smart. Do you know what I read somewhere as well, that in this time that they've basically, because I mean, if we just look at what's happening with the youth, not just in America, but I think a lot of it in America, because America is such a powerhouse, and what they've been doing with Gen Z, you know, how they're like literally corrupting the young kids' brains and turning them into marshmallows in many ways. In the meantime, the Chinese young men over the past 20 or 30 years have been taking these injections, testosterone, and the average Chinese man is now 2 to 3 inches taller than what he used to be then. So while they're pretty much dumbing the West down, they're actually building themselves up, making not just physically stronger, but mentally stronger. I mean, you look at these Chinese kids at school and what they do. I mean, they are brilliant. They are. I mean, you just look at these formations and things they do. You just look at them, you know, from their schools and stuff. They are like, it's like one being that is just dancing together or doing these acrobatic things, whatever, you know. It's actually amazing. And as you say, now they've been watching, and China has infiltrated Africa. I don't think there's one country in Africa that is not isn't held at the throat by China. I mean, I can certainly say South Africa is. Namibia. Namibia is just, I mean, ex-Southwest Africa.
Right. Yeah.
It's tragic.
Yeah,
it's
no
tragic
question about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Anyway, John, I think, yeah, we've kind of hit an hour. So I would love to have you on again, and we can definitely talk about the Chinese stuff. And I want to talk more about those jackal-y things, the jackals. And then, of course, I know what you're also saying. There was like basically 3 tiers. So if the EHMs, Economic Hitman, wasn't able to win them over, they'd have the jackals. And then if that didn't work, then the military industrial complex. And then, of course, the military would then come in. So it's fascinating to see how this has worked. And, you know, and again, I want to just say, I know, because a lot of my viewers are American, and I love you guys. It's never anything against America that when we talk about stuff like this, but we do acknowledge America is a superpower and has been a superpower for a long time. And I think there was just a lot of bad energy that has infiltrated there because of the power. So all over the world, it's the same, you know.
Chantelle, I can say that I feel like I'm a very, very loyal American. My ancestors fought in the revolution and every war since, except the most recent ones. And I feel that to be a loyal American, we have to expose the mistakes we've made. You know, the only way to have a democracy is to analyze your mistakes, to admit to them, analyze them, and correct them. And that's what I do. It's because I love the United States that I write these things. I want to expose the mistakes we've made and the death economy we've created, and now the opportunity to move into a life economy, which, as you said, we should discuss in another show. I'd look forward to doing that.
I love that, because I think it's so true. You know, when we acknowledge our mistakes, we can change them. And when we take responsibility for the cock-ups we've made, we can change it. And that's all over. It's really all over. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. I know it's morning for you. It's evening for me. And it's been, as I said, you know, never in a million years. Guys, you know, when you see something, this was early 2000s already. So let's say 20 odd years ago, I saw you on television. And I've never, ever forgotten you. You know, it's amazing, like when you never forget someone. And who would have thunk that I would be sitting with you talking to you about this on my YouTube channel all these years later. So I feel like a little bit starstruck, yeah, I have to say.
It's been my pleasure, Chantelle. It's been my pleasure, and keep up your great work. But the work you're doing is so very important. And please keep Aquarius rising in Africa and all over the world.
Most definitely. Most definitely will do. But yeah, so maybe I'll just talk to you a little bit off air after the show. But is there anything you'd maybe just like to end off with, and just to our viewers?
Well, I think we live in a very blessed time because we are understanding the mistakes we've made, and we're at a time of tremendous opportunity to correct those mistakes and move into what I like to call a life economy, an economic system that's regenerative instead of degenerative. And I'd like to get into that another time with you, but I think everybody, all your listeners, should feel privileged, as I do, to be alive at this time when these opportunities are here. And all the prophecies of so many cultures around the world, including the prophecy of Aquarius rising, to take us to this time where there's a portal that we can enter into a new form of consciousness. And we have to make it happen, but we can all participate in that.
I fully agree with that. And the only way we're going to do that is by raising our consciousness and by getting out of the matrix through raising our consciousness and through acknowledging the mistakes we've made. And through acknowledging how, I always say, we all just got to link arms, stand up, be in alignment, and then we can all do it together. That's really what we had to do at this time, in my opinion. So I want to say thank you very much to you, John. It's an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And I want to say thank you to all our viewers as well, who are always here and always joining in the chats and what have you. I appreciate you guys. And God bless you all. And we will see John soon. I'm going to chat him off air now to set up the next interview. Okay, guys, take good care. Lots of love. Have a beautiful weekend.